Thank you for listening to the ThePPod from the Somerset Safeguarding Children Partnership. Due to the nature of this podcast, themes relating to the abuse and neglect of children are discussed. Therefore, listener discretion is advised and the content unsuitable for children.
Welcome to the ThePPod.
All right then, welcome back everybody to the ThePPod, the partnership podcast from the Somerset Safeguarding Children Partnership. And we are extremely excited and slightly nervous today at today's episode, because today we are bringing you something a little bit different and a little bit special. And it's a little bit different, a little bit special for several reasons today. Firstly, welcome along. This is part of the Somerset Safeguarding Children Partnership's Forum Week in December 2025, when we are running a whole series of webinars throughout the entire week based on the subject of child sexual abuse. And I'm so pleased to say we have some of the biggest names in the whole of the country on the subject of child sexual abuse. Some real experts bringing it to you throughout the week. We have the Lucy Faithfull Foundation, we have the Centre of Expertise on Child Sexual Abuse, we have the NSPCC, we have SARSAS, and so many more. So thank you so much for joining us as we launch the week with today's live recording of the ThePPod, which makes it the second really exciting reason that we're here today. And for the first time ever, we are broadcasting this live as a live podcast recording. Normally, when we do the ThePPods, it's quite a nice kind of cozy environment with just myself and my guests. But here we are throwing ourselves to the wolves, and we have a whole load of people. Thank you so much, everybody, for coming along to join us today as take part in today's special ThePPod recording. And I'll talk a bit more about that in just a second. Secondly, we're really excited for today because we have friend of the ThePPod coming back to us once again, the wonderful Sally Shearer, OBE, from National Child Safeguarding Practice Review Panel, who's going to talk to us about the National Panel's report that was published in November of last year. I wanted them all to notice, focusing on child sexual abuse, interfamilial child sexual abuse, which has really framed this entire week moving forward, and why we're taking this so seriously. And we've got so many experts coming in to talk to us throughout the week to help empower and improve practice around protecting children against sexual abuse. So as we move into today, as I say, this is a live recording. Just a few bits before we get going. First of all, can I just offer a trigger warning to everybody joining us today, either live or listening to the recording at a later date. Obviously, because of the subject matter, we will be discussing child sexual abuse. Of course, that can and does affect everybody differently. So if you do find yourself affected by this in any way from today or any of our other webinars, you can go to the SSCP website. If you go to the Forum Week, December Forum Week 2025, you'll find a whole list of help and support and advice lines for you at the bottom of that Forum Week page. So do tune into that if you need to. Now, as I mentioned, this is a very special live recording for us. And on that note, we are joined by loads of different professionals from across the workforce, both locally and nationally, I'm so pleased to say. And as part of that, we really want you to be participating in today's recording. So on that note, we are running a QA function throughout the recording today. So if you have got questions that you'd like to put to any of our guests today, please pop those into the QA function in the chat there. And we'll be able to see that. And I've got my wonderful colleague Sam here in the background, who's going to be keeping an eye on that. And we'll post any of your questions to any of our guests at the end of the recording. Also, we want to get your voices in today, because that is absolutely crucial in the work that we do moving forward in improving safeguarding practice for children. So on that note, we have got a poll, which is going to be running throughout the recording today. My colleague Sam has launched that live there. So if you can give that some thought and input any questions, any reflections you've got into that poll as we go through. And as we go through our recording, we are going to come back and we're going to pick out your reflections. And it's so important we do get your feedback. So please, any response you've got to those, you can click through the poll yourself as you go through it, pop in your responses to it, and we will bring those into the recording as we go through. And finally, in terms of that interaction throughout the week this week, we are running a survey, which is actually going to be running right up towards the end of December, which is a Child Sexual Abuse Practitioner Confidence and Knowledge Survey. It only takes 5 minutes to complete, and it is absolutely vital as part of our ongoing quality assurance work, helping us to understand how partners respond to concerns around child sexual abuse. And by sharing your views with us, it will really help to highlight any strengths within the safeguarding partnership, Of course, identify any areas for improvement, and importantly, contribute to better services for children and families. So your input really genuinely does matter, and it's only by working together that we can strengthen our collective responses and ensure as much as we can that every child is protected. So, as I mentioned, we've got a lot going on today, and I'm so pleased, as I mentioned right at the start of this, to bring in my first guest today, which is Sally Shearer, OBE, from the National Child Safeguarding Practice Review Panel. So, Sally, honestly, thank you so much, not just for joining us again for another podcast recording, because we've done a couple already, but for agreeing to come and join us live here today in front of everybody else. So, Sally, thank you so much for coming along.
Oh, well, thank you very much for inviting me, Steve. You've got a really great week ahead, and I'll definitely, as I mentioned to you earlier, we'll be dialing in. You've got some really fantastic presentations. But I think for today, what I'm really looking forward to is hearing from the partnership as well, because one of the things that we're trying to do more of on the National Child Safeguarding Practice Review Panel is hearing from safeguarding partnerships, because, as you say, it's only by working together that we're going to start to increase things for children.
Yeah, absolutely. So Sally, thank you. I did mention just a moment ago that you have joined us for a couple of other previous episodes. But for anybody who's unaware of not heard the previous ones or unaware of the National Child Safeguarding Practice Review Panel, could you possibly just start off by providing a bit of an overview about what the panel is and the work that you do?
Yeah, sure. So the panel's made up of 11 members, and we all come from senior roles in different sector backgrounds. So obviously, I'm a registered children's nurse by background, but we've got a paediatrician, GP, social workers, somebody with a legal background. So what we try and do is mimic what you have in a partnership, really, so that when we're discussing children, we can do that from a truly multi-agency perspective. And the panel was set up in 2018 following the 2017 Children and Social Work Act, and we're hosted by the Department for Education in Westminster. And our role very much is to have that overview of all of those serious incident notifications that happen across England, to harvest the learning and make sure that that learning is shared, but also to have some system leadership of the child protection system in England. So what does that look like? What does that look like, what we do? So we meet every other Tuesday, and during that meeting we will discuss all of the serious incident notifications that have come in the preceding 2 weeks. We usually review between 20 and 25 every fortnight. And then outside of that, we're working on the national reviews that we do, thinking about progressing our own business development as a panel and our own plans, and then events such as this with partnerships or meeting with partnerships that want to discuss particular children with us.
Perfect. Thank you, Sally. And say, if anybody's not heard of the National Child Safeguarding Practice Review Panel before, do check out the website. Like you say, there's details there around some of the national reviews that you've carried out previously, and the national reports, which obviously, as we're sort of picking up on today, just one of those, one of many there. You can also sign up to the National Panel's newsletter, which I cannot recommend highly enough. Again, you can find a link to that on our Forum Week webpage there if you want to have a look on that. So, Sally, obviously we're here today, as I mentioned at the start, to talk about the report that was published back in November last year, which was I wanted them all to notice, the report into Interfamilial Child Sexual Abuse. Before we get into that, I know the National Panel has been undertaking a lot of work recently, as well as undergoing a number of changes. Could you possibly sort of just outline for us either some of the recent developments or any plans you've got on the horizon at all?
Yeah, sure. So you may have heard that we've got a new panel chair, Sir David Holmes. He joined us in June. He's really getting into his stride now and keeping us very busy. And for anybody on the podcast who has attended any of our recent webinars, you'll be aware that we're working on a new learning hub. Historically, all of our national reviews and briefing papers have all been held on the gov.uk website, which isn't terribly easy to navigate, but we've just received some additional funding to set up our own website and have our own learning hub, and we hope that's going to be really useful safeguarding partnerships. We're starting off with 4 key themes, and one of them is the under twos. I'll be leading on that one. So what we will do within each part of that website is we will include any national reports that we've done ourselves, our own data, but also any research or reviews that other key stakeholders in the sector have undertaken. There'll be animations, podcasts. We want it to be really interactive, but also the thing that we're really looking for is input from safeguarding partnerships as well. So if a partnership's done a really good LCSPR, we'd want that to go into that section, but also where people have developed tools or training resources, so that it's all on one website that can be shared. So we're really excited about that. I hope that'll make a big impact for partnerships. Since the last time I spoke to you, we published our race review, our race thematic. It's called It's Silent. And that reflects the absence of the voice of Black and other minority children in rapid reviews and LCSPRs. So sometimes we see that ethnicity is documented, but then there's nothing further on that. And sometimes what that review found was that often the child's voice and daily experience was missing from agency records. So obviously it can't be then analysed within a rapid review and LCSPR. So there's some really useful questions within that race thematic for safeguarding partnerships, for review authors, but also for practitioners. And then our next national review to be published will be the review into the very tragic death of baby Victoria Martin. That is in its concluding stages now, and one to look out for in the early spring. And then you mentioned our newsletter, which was coming out bi-monthly, but that now comes out monthly. So as you said, please sign up. There's loads of information in there, but it's also where we advertise all of our events. And historically, we probably ran about 5 to 6 webinars a year. We're now doing these every month. Some of you may have joined our last one on the 10th of December, which was all about our panel guidance, which was refreshed in June of this year. And there's another one coming up on the 10th of December, that's next week, and that's looking at emerging themes. So another really interactive, hearing from SPs. What are you seeing and what do you want us to focus on?
It's so crucial, isn't it? Like I say, we can do all this work, but actually, unless we're communicating it and importantly sharing good practice, we're kind of fighting an uphill battle, aren't we? And I have to say, I think certainly from my experience, and I'm sure many other people, there's such a willingness of safeguarding partnerships from across the country, wanting to come together, wanting to learn from each other, wanting to share good practice. I know we're always reaching out to other areas that are always really accommodating and vice versa, because that's what it's all about. We're all here to do the same job, essentially, and improve practice, safeguarding practice towards children. And the more we can work together to learn from each other, the absolutely crucial role that we all have. But I think you're right to highlight in terms of the national panel, being that sort of the centre of the hub. Really, everything comes into you from right away across the country, and I know, from contacts that we have, such as yourself for our area, that ability to feed in from local areas around what everybody's doing, essentially, and all the good work that's out there. So, so thank you so much for that. And I'll be interested. I'll be honest, I haven't read it, but I'll be interested to read that latest report, because I know in terms of learning, I know it's often come up in local CSPRs that often ethnicity is mentioned, and I think we've talked about this before, but it lacks the so what. Yes, that from this ethnic minority group, but what does that actually mean? What does that mean for the child? What does that mean for the learning? So it'd be really interesting to sort of see what's been pulled out from that, I think. So, as I mentioned, we are here to talk about I Wanted Them All to Notice. And I think before we get into the nuts and bolts of it, if we can, I'm just intrigued about what was it that sort of triggered the report to be published in the first place. And as I mentioned, obviously as a central hub, all the significant notifications coming to yourselves. Was it really as a result of that? Were you seeing a rise in concerns around child sexual abuse, or was it something else?
I think it was that and several other things that all came together, really. We were receiving a high number of notifications for intrafamilial child sexual abuse. and they were all progressing to LCSPR because they'd all got further learning that could be harvested from them. And what was coming across loud and clear was that safeguarding partnerships were all identifying the same gaps in knowledge and practice. And so we thought this really warrants a much deeper exploration. Obviously, there'd been quite a focus on extrafamilial harm, but we thought it was time to put some focus on sexual abuse that occurs within the family. And I think the other thing was we knew that the number of assessments that were being undertaken for child sexual abuse, child protection assessments, was low. And that was lower than other data was telling us that it should be. And so that's why we decided to have that real focus on intrafamilial child sexual abuse.
I always think it's fascinating. It always causes lots of debate when you look at, you mentioned child protection plans there, and I think this is purely off the top of my head. I believe something like only about 3% of child protection plans are under the category of child sexual abuse, and yet we know it's a much bigger issue than that. In fact, it's interesting. I've been doing quite a lot of research around this at the moment, and looking back to the mid-80s or so, I believe at that point in time it was estimated that about 1 in every million children had experienced sexual abuse. And I looked at it, and I think at that point in time there were about 6 million children in England at that point. So it was estimated in the mid-80s that only about 6 children had been sexually abused. I know now, in terms of the current estimations, it's vastly different from that. And again, I'm probably going to misquote here, but I believe the current estimation is about 1 in 20 children, which is worlds apart from where we were, the understanding. And yet, like you say, in terms of when we look at child protection plans, a very small minority are under that category. And I think if we can, because I know these were some of the kind of real bits that the panel really kind of teased out, well, why is that? What is that looking like? You know, why is that contradiction between what we know from research compared with actually what we see in practice, I guess, from this. So I think for me, reading through the report, it really brought to light some really incredibly important systemic and practice issues, which really need addressing in order to both protect children from harm of abuse and importantly respond effectively once that abuse comes to light, I think. So I know as part of that, the report comes up with a number of key findings, which would be great if we can to do a bit of a deep dive into one by one. But to start off with, can you just give us a bit of an overview of those findings?
Yeah, sure. So just to give us a scale of the cohort of rapid reviews and LCSPRs that the reviewers looked at, there were 136 rapid review reports, and that featured 193 children because, as we know, some serious incident notifications cover more than one child. And we looked at the period from when the panel was set up in 2018 until the report was written, and they started that in 2023. And it made 4 key findings, as you said, which highlighted, a systemic failure across all agencies to recognise and respond to children who are at risk of or who were already being sexually abused by somebody within their family environment. And that may include family friends, not necessarily a relative. So the 4 key big ticket items that were pulled out of that was, first of all, not hearing children's voices when they were trying to tell people that they were being abused, and then not understanding what their needs were, was the first one. The second one will be familiar to everybody who works in child protection. It's the importance of understanding the context within which that abuse is taking place. And within the family home, obviously, there's relationships, but there are also parents and carers who carry their own vulnerabilities and needs. So we saw very much that as safety plans and written agreements were being prepared, these weren't always taken into account the parents' context and vulnerabilities, and particularly those where there was domestic abuse occurring within the family, because obviously where coercion and control exists, that may limit the ability of one parent to be able to protect their child. The third one was around the challenges, again, across all agencies, about identifying the signs of abuse and understanding the risk of who was in the family or who had contact with the family, and raising those concerns. And then the final one was in response to concerns of intrafamilial child sexual abuse responses. So once a concern had been identified and raised, there was then often a lack of really thorough investigation and effective action that then went on to support and safeguard that child.
Absolutely. And actually, just picking up from that, I think last time we met is when the National Panel had published your last annual report, and that theme coming through quite strongly then, as you just mentioned there, about that need to think holistically, to join up the dots. And often, we might recognise that there may be domestic abuse, or we might recognise there are parental mental health difficulties, but often just not joining up all those dots to think, actually, what does this mean for the child in terms of protection for the child or in terms of risk for the child? So it's interesting seeing that coming through on this one as well, I think. So and if we can just go through those to sort of put a bit of meat to the bones around it. So picking up on that first key finding, really, about hearing the voices of children, which is something that, for anybody that knows me, we go on about constantly, and the importance of that. And this is obviously something that is a thread that runs through so many reviews, both now and in the past, and something that we really highlight as of critical importance. But for me, the review itself, I think, really pinpoints down some really specific issues when considering this in that context of child sexual abuse. So would you be able to cover some of those for us?
Yeah, absolutely. And you're absolutely right. There are some very specific issues that pertain to child sexual abuse. So I think the first finding was that it's really painful and often very difficult for children and young people to be able to tell somebody that they're being sexually abused. And that's really summed up by the report's title, I Wanted Them All to Notice. And this was a direct quote taken from one of the children that the reviewers spoke to when they were doing the review. She said that she was really frightened, didn't want to disclose, but she just was hoping that somebody would notice and ask her about it. And yet, set against that, the review also found that overwhelmingly practitioners felt that they had to wait to be approached by a child with a disclosure. And secondly, it's really hard when you're waiting for a disclosure if you're considering the needs of children who are pre-verbal or non-verbal. And I think, in summary, when you looked at practitioners across those 193 children that were in this cohort, overwhelmingly, it came across that they were uncertain what to say. These are difficult conversations to have anyway, but they felt unprepared to do that. And a real fear, I suppose, of interfering with any evidence, criminal investigation evidence as well. They were unsure what they could actually say. There was a bit of a myth out there around children who are undergoing police interviews for child sexual abuse. They can't be offered any therapeutic support while the investigations and interviews are going on. They can't even have a compassionate discussion with a foster carer or a practitioner or a parent about how they feel following making that disclosure, and telling them that actually their feelings are absolutely understandable. So that came over really overwhelmingly from all of those reviews, those very strong messages. We also saw that where the criminal threshold wasn't met, then cases were often closed to children's social care. And then the child just goes home and stays in the home with the perpetrator, and the impact that has on young people, that they're not being believed, and they've taken that very brave step of speaking up, and yet nothing in their life has changed. It must be absolutely soul destroying. And in many cases, the children go on to retract their allegation. And so, again, then the case is closed without any real thought or professional curiosity into why that retraction has happened. And then when you think about those children who don't make verbal disclosures but are trying to exhibit, trying to send that message to people, either through a deterioration in their mental health or escalating, challenging behaviours, nobody asked them why they were behaving in that way and what was driving it. So for that reason, there is a recommendation in the report that the government should work with professional bodies to make sure that practitioners across all agencies, this wasn't a single agency issue, it was across the entire system, that practitioners didn't really feel that they'd got the knowledge, skills and capabilities to undertake this, what is, let's face it, quite a challenging task. So that has been made one of the recommendations around practitioners having multi-agency training and guidance to support them to undertake their roles.
Thanks, Sally. I think it's interesting. You mentioned the word fear there a minute ago, and I was in a meeting with our wonderful colleagues from Bernardo's back on Friday, and that word came up quite a lot of that fear from practitioners that might get it wrong, might say the wrong thing. I might, get hauled across the coals when I go to court about something for saying the wrong thing. But that essentially, whether consciously or unconsciously, leads people to not having the conversations in the first place, or actively avoiding them sometimes, if there's that fear of like, oh my God, I think somebody might be trying to tell me something here. And I think just the title of this report was so key. And I know in a previous episode that of the ThePPod that I recorded with a young person who had experienced sexual abuse for 7 years and was really keen to tell her story. It's something that she said over and over again is I wanted people to know. I wanted people to ask me the question. I dropped hints. I said things, and all I wanted was somebody just to say to me, "What can I just check what you meant by that?" And that, because I always say to people, how do you start a conversation? How do you even start a conversation? Say, "Oh, by the way, I need to let you know this has happened to me." And these things are difficult enough as they are, but very, very personal. And then against a background of abuse and grooming and potential connotations for disruption to family, how do you start that? So just wanting somebody to say, actually, can I just ask you about this is so crucial. So yeah, I think the title of it was absolutely spot on from my experience from talking to victims there. But also that when we talk about the voice of the child, thinking that's what the child is talking to us, that what they're verbalizing to us. And I think you're absolutely right to pick out that we're not very good at picking up on behavior as communication. And I know that certainly came out in the NSPCC review, I think it's 2022, looking at harm to adolescents, where they picked out actually a lot of interventions focused on managing behavior rather than thinking, what is this behavior potentially telling us? What is this communicating to us? And again, just being able to tune into that and have that confidence just to ask those questions. And I think for me, time and time again, I think one of the big messages I'm trying to instill at the moment is actually the most important thing is just to be there and be there to listen. And you don't have to be there to take on all the responsibility of everything and solve everything. Actually, just by being there, you're doing the right thing because they've chosen you as that person that they feel safe to talk to. It's a real privilege, if not, acknowledging it can be scary, and that's okay. But they have chosen you, and that is such a unique position to be put in, I think, by anybody, and have that trust instilled in you. So I'm just, Sally, if we can just pause for a moment. We've got, as I mentioned, we've got a poll running in the background today. And Sam, I've got you in the background here with our first poll question. So just for everybody listening, the first poll that we've put out to everybody is picking up on this subject is, what do you feel are the biggest barriers for you personally, or from your perspective of the organisation, in engaging children in conversations where sexual abuse is known or suspected? So Sam, can I pull you in for any feedback that we've got from everybody?
Yeah, of course. And it massively picks up on what you and Sally have just been talking about. A lot of the feedback is around the fear of getting it wrong, the fear of the language being used and in the interpretation of that, especially with age-appropriate content and not leading questions, but also around interpretation of language and gestures along with that play as well coming in from there. I can see that they've also picked up from it from a child's point of view. So the fear of the child maybe not being believed, or their vulnerability, shame that might be attached to that, that, as well as concerns for repercussions within there. Some of the other bits coming out is around the building of rapport with those children as well, to allow them the space to tell their story within that. And also the young people feeling in a safe space so that they can have that as well. And I believe that's, in a nutshell, the responses we've had.
Perfect. Lovely. Thank you for that, Sam, for jumping in. But yeah, I think it's really key, all of those things. And actually, the other thing that you mentioned, Sally, that I wanted to pick up on, and certainly picked up from the report, is that in terms of children withdrawing reports that they've made, and often that being seized on quicker, responded to quicker than actually when that initial disclosure was made. And often people sort of suddenly jumping back and going, okay, well, there's nothing we can do now then. They've retracted it. And I think it's, or you're muted, Sally, if you're responding.
Yes, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, thank you for that. And thank you, Sam. If we can just come on to the second point, second key finding, really. And I think, as I mentioned before, that common theme, I think, that comes up in this report, and as you just mentioned in the last annual report from the national panel, is that need to think holistically and join up those dots and understand that full context, really, of a child's lived experiences and family situations. And I know this is something that was kind of particularly focus point for the second key theme that we just mentioned, particularly where there might be parental mental health difficulties or domestic abuse, like you mentioned, and how that might create barriers to engaging with families, barriers to keeping children safe. So would you be able to talk through that in a bit more?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think the really difficult thing with child sexual abuse within the family environment is that it is happening within the family environment. And what comes with that are a lot of relationships and a lot of history. And where an allegation of child sexual abuse within the home is made, I think we ask quite a lot of parents. It would be a lot for a parent if you didn't have any other vulnerabilities. So we're asking them to keep their child safe. We're asking them to support their child through any interventions from our colleagues in either police or health. Their child's likely to be distressed. And this is all happening at a time when that parent will be struggling with their own emotions about it all as well. Never mind those other vulnerabilities that may be happening within the home. There may be domestic abuse, substance misuse, mental health issues, physical. The annual report also shows, I think it was about 25% of all age notifications that we get, there is a physical disability within the home as well. So it's about, when you're writing those safety plans and written agreements, that whole context is taken into consideration. Otherwise, that plan is going to fail before it even sets off. And then the family will then end up feeling blamed, and even worse than they were already feeling. And I think it's particularly sensitive if this involves harmful sexual behaviours from siblings as well. That must be incredibly difficult for parents to address. So very much a need for practitioners to take that whole context into consideration. And what the review found was there's often an over-reliance on the parent who hasn't been abusing the child to protect that child. And I think we've already alluded to how difficult, if not impossible, that must be if there is domestic abuse and coercion and control within that relationship as well. And I think sometimes when parents are giving the impression that they're complying with a written agreement or a safety plan, but then they're not really, where is the professional curiosity around why is that behaviour being seen? What else is going on within this family? So it's really important that there's a holistic assessment of the strengths and needs within that family, and also the resources that they've got available to them, both financial and emotional, but their just ability to cope with whatever is going on, and their ability to be able to comply with any plans that have been put in place.
Mm. And it's interesting. We hear phrases like disguised compliance, don't we? And well, they said they were going to do this, or they're not the abusive parent, so they need to be doing this. Why are they not? And this term of disguised compliance comes up fairly frequently. But I think you're right, is trying to understand why is that, and actually is it a realistic expectation we're placing on somebody within that bigger context there?
Yeah.
If we're saying to a parent, well, actually, okay, father has been sexually abusing the child, mother, you need to then be, step in, be protective factor. And I think as a society, this is a very emotive issue, and particularly interfamilial child sexual abuse. And I think a lot is placed on mothers in particular to be the protector, be the safety factor. And so essentially you can then add on a lot of blame on top of that if they're not in a position to do that, and say, well, she should have been she's complicit to it, she's allowing this to happen, all these kind of things. But actually, is what we're asking realistic? Like I say, if we have a backdrop then of domestic abuse, controlling coercive behaviour, physical abuse, actually is what we're asking somebody to do realistic? And actually, when we're looking at risk assessments, it's easy sometimes to kind of put something on paper and go, there we go, we've got our nice action plan that'll do the job. But actually, is that realistic? Are we setting somebody up to fail essentially for that? So like you say, that need to really think carefully and not just kind of tick a box to go, there we go, we've got that on our plan and that's sorted there. It's really key. So thank you, Sally. Sam, if I can bring you back in for a minute as well. It brings us to our second poll question that we've got, which is, what do you do in your organisation which supports a holistic approach to working with families, including that engagement with family members, information sharing, understanding cultural differences, as we're talking right at the top of this episode as well, and considering that context around protective factors and risk factors. So, Sam, what have we had coming in?
So a lot of the responses are talking about gaining the voice of the child. We've got the CAMS is trauma informed in how that they consider all of the factors coming in from there. Going with the element of working with families and not doing two. A couple of them have also said about involving the family in events and involving the whole family to that as well, bringing them in. Also sharing weekly summaries with the family, so checking in and going from there. One of the points said about having honest, open conversations with them, being professionally curious, but also understanding consent and PR in regards to that, but gaining not just the child's voice or the young person's, but also their wishes within that as well. And I think that's really important. And that is all of them so far.
Brilliant. Thank you, Sam. And like you say, Sally, actually, the connotations around this, particularly when we're looking at interfamilial child sexual abuse, must be really, really difficult. And you mentioned sibling sexual abuse, and we've got our wonderful colleagues from the Greenhouse coming into us later on this week talking about exactly that, the sibling sexual abuse program that they have for adult survivors of child sexual abuse. But I know in the run up to this, I was having some conversations with them, and they were saying that we've got to understand this is such a difficult area for families, that either one of your children is being abusive and affecting the other, or somebody that you have trusted in your life, whether that is a long-time partner or a new partner, stepfather, anything like that. Actually, that's huge to say somebody you've trusted and you've brought into your life is responsible for harming your child. And I know one of the key aspects they talked about is just how challenging, how difficult that is for families, and how understandably quite often people will want to reject that idea because it's so big to think about initially, and so big to take on board that we often see that initial response of it's not true, and sort of shutting that out. But like you say, being able to work with that really effectively is so key. And it was nice to hear, actually. Thank you everybody for your feedback from that in the poll. But so nice to hear about that trauma informed approach and seeking to understand right from the word go and adapt our processes and our approach to understanding the context. And often that is within a context of trauma and ACEs for children and for parents quite often as well. So, Sally, if we can move on then, looking at that third learning point around identifying signs and understanding risks and raising concerns, what were the main kind of aspects of that learning point to be considered?
So there were a few things here, Steve, and if we start with the signs, the review found that practitioners, again, across all agencies, weren't routinely identifying and acting on concerns. So two things there, the identification in the first place and then acting on those concerns. And that might be because of their level of understanding. Different people with different professional backgrounds have differing levels of knowledge, or it may be because of stereotypes and assumptions. And I think we had a really good example of this at panel a couple of weeks ago. A Safeguarding Partnership had done a review on a 15-year-old boy. There were concerns that he was being criminally exploited, and he was being very heavily influenced by his girlfriend, who, it said in the review, she was significantly older than him. And yet sexual exploitation wasn't considered within that review, and it just led us all to reflect whether that would have been different if the child had been a 15-year-old girl and her partner was an older male. So that's the first thing. I think the second thing is it picked out that there's a lack of professional curiosity, and we've touched on this already, about when that behaviour or mental health deteriorates, but stopping and saying to that child, what's happening with you? Is there anything you want to talk about? So not picking up on those more subtle signs. And that's particularly the case with children who are disabled. And we saw a lot of evidence where with disabled children, their obvious emotional distress or an escalation in their challenging behaviour was often put down to their disability. It was a symptom of their disability rather than a symptom that something was very wrong in their lives. And I think it's really shocking, it really shocked me, that in a third of those reviews that were looked at, a family member was part of that review. That family member had got a history of sexual offending or was known to present a risk to children, and they had moved into a home with children without effective risk assessment taking place. And some of those convictions had been for really serious offences within a family home. So I think the review found that this represents a lack of knowledge of what a previous history of sexual offending actually means for children when they move into the home. And then thirdly, it was quite evident in private and public law proceedings that the risk had also been failed to recognise. And we did see cases where a child had either been placed with an abusing parent or allowed unsupervised contact with their abuser because of that lack of understanding of that risk of previous sexual offending history. And then finally, we saw that children's social care and probation often work in silos. So probation have got some really important information on an offender, and that's not always shared with children's social care if they know that that person has got access to children. And similarly, children's social care may know that there's somebody in the family who's committed an offence but aren't proactively seeking that information. And the two organisations are working in isolation, whereas if they came together and shared information, it could really strengthen the protection to that child. So again, there's a recommendation within the report calling for government to ensure that there's a robust risk assessment and management process in place for people who present a risk to children.
That's great. Thank you, Sally. And again, picking up from that, for those of you who are joining us throughout the week as part of our forum, we've got probation coming into us on Thursday to talk about exactly that, around how they assess risk when there's a known offender, and how do we kind of consider that as part of our risk assessment and part of our planning as well, because it's so key. And I think it's interesting because I think for me, the report picks up on some quite specifics, as does actually the National Panel's annual report, because we often talk about a lack of joined up working, lack of information sharing. It becomes a bit of a catch-all sometimes if we're not careful. But I think what I like from this report and from the annual report is the National Panel being quite specific, saying actually in this report, particularly thinking about probation and children's services. Actually, how do we work together to risk assess in that particular instance? I know in the annual report, it talked very much about children's services and adult services, both adult mental health services and adult social care, particularly kind of linking in much more effectively with children's services there. And I think that's really useful when we can start to really hone it down to identify some gaps. And I know from the annual report is something that we've raised and actually really makes you stop and think, actually, we just made an assumption, say particularly from adult social care and children's social care. You work for the same employer, same for the local authority, you joined up, often sharing the same offices. Surely there must be good joined up working. But I know from talking to colleagues within children's services, they'll often say to me, actually, no, there's a real void. We haven't got the same database systems, we haven't got the same recording systems, and actually often it relies on walking down the corridor and talking to one of our colleagues in adult social care to say, oh, by the way, this family's sort of been open to me now, and I've sort of picked up there's, you may be involved. Do you know them? Which is a real area for development, I think, when we have to rely on somebody literally walking down the corridor to check on things. So I think that's useful when we can really start to hone down the specifics. And I know moving forward locally, it's something we really need to look at as well, particularly around, like I say, probation and children's services, where there is that potential, that known risk, as we've just been talking about.
And I think it often relies on the offender to share that information with probation, that they've got access to children. And if they withhold that information, then there's obviously risk there.
Yeah, or relying on previous offenders to actually disclose that to a new partner.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Very, very. I know it does happen occasionally, but not common unless there is probation over them saying that you have to do this as part of your criteria. Yes. But even then, we know it doesn't always happen. Thank you, Sally. And Sam, can I pull you in again? Thinking about our poll that we've got running on this one. So the question that we asked for everybody listening is, what are you doing within your organisation that supports professional curiosity, as we've just been picking up on, and importantly, what areas do you feel that could be improved? So Sam, can I hand over to you for that one?
Yes, of course. So we've got a couple of great things coming in to say regular supervision and trainings being offered. Some places use the place approach and to promote the use of curiosity, and they review individuals in supervision and team meetings as collaborative. And we've also got some others that they feel areas that could be improved, and one of them is just asking that question, is what you guys have been saying in this. Also, staff and professionals asking relevant questions to gain clarification within that as well. So what is the voice of the child saying, and what's our interpretation within that? Asking more questions, but without it being interrogation. And also not making assumptions around those questions either, and filling in those gaps. We've also got listen, believe, document, voice of the child or young person, using their own words and giving reassurance as well. And regular reminders for staff when safeguarding concerns are reported, going back to staff and asking them for their actions, and just that big message that safeguarding is everyone's responsibility.
Fantastic. Lovely. Thank you, Sam. And again, thank you everybody for joining us live here today to be able to feed into this, because it is so crucial. And it is, I think it's something we really need to look at. And again, it came up in the conversation earlier and came up in my meeting on Friday with Bernardo's is often that fear of, if we talk to a child, are we going to muddy the water? Are we going to mess up a criminal investigation? And that void essentially that it leaves victims in, where, like you mentioned earlier, Sally, somebody may have disclosed something, and essentially kind of everyone backs off for them, and we can't talk to them about this now. And you've got somebody feeling very, very vulnerable, and everybody going, well, I'm not sure we can actually talk to them about that subject, because what if we mess it up here? And that just really impacting on victims. So it is something I think locally and nationally we really need to look at, is that kind of framework around that, to say, actually, it's really important you do this, and you do this in a safe way, and again, keeping the focus on the child, what's important for them at this particular point in time, and this huge junction in their life, I think. So, thank you, Sally. Well, I'm just picking up on the last point then, which picks up around how professionals respond to concerns around child sexual abuse. And for me personally, there were 2 points that really kind of resonated were that reluctance sometimes for professionals to actually clearly document concerns around child sexual abuse. And I think that comes up. We were talking about child protection plans earlier. Often, we know that those for neglect tend to be around the 50% mark of the number of child protection plans under the category of neglect, and child sexual abuse being about 3%. But as part of that, professionals feeling reluctant to actually write it down, put it down, in their case notes, in their plans, to say, actually, we are concerned around child sexual abuse. But linked in with that, often that lack of uncertainty or confidence or lack of understanding between legal thresholds in particular and safeguarding thresholds, which I know was a really key part of this report. And often safeguarding responses coming to an end if the criminal justice system aren't able to progress things any further. So can we pick up on that? And could you possibly explain the findings in relation to this, as well as any findings in relation to other multi-agency working?
Yeah, sure. And I think these are two real key parts of the report. So first of all, what overwhelmingly was found, this isn't just one or two of those 133 reviews, this was an overwhelming message from all of them, was that where the criminal threshold wasn't met, then that often led to a closure of any further multi-agency child protection investigations, and almost a sense amongst practitioners that it was the criminal justice system that decided whether a child had been abused or not. So really important to understand and underline the difference between the criminal threshold, where there is insufficient evidence to progress the case, and the child protection section 47 threshold. And that is one of the recommendations, that safeguarding partnerships do an audit of their cases and make sure that those two thresholds are very much understood, because as we all know, criminal threshold and child protection threshold are two entirely different things. And the research is really strongly in favour of continuing to progress a case through child protection proceedings, where there's very much a multi-agency triangulation of information showing that you might not have met the criminal threshold, but there's still something going on in this family that the child needs to be protected from. So that was a really key finding. And then,
Sally, to interrupt, but I think that is really key, and it's something you see quite a lot. And just to clarify for everybody, in terms of legal thresholds, we're talking about beyond reasonable doubt. Yeah. When we're talking about safeguarding threshold, we're on that balance of probabilities, which are two entirely different things, as you say. And I think you see it time and time again, and people saying, well, there's no further action from the police, which I know was a really key point as well from the report, that NFA, and everybody's saying, well, we can't do anything now because the police have dropped it and that's the end of it. But I think it's really important for people to understand, let's say, that legal threshold being very, very high, but also it relies on a lot of evidence just to get it to court in the first place, and through the Crown Prosecution Service, let alone an actual prosecution there. So even if the police don't feel like they can take it any further, or if they do feel like they can take it further, the Crown Prosecution may look at it and say, this is, we've not got enough here to stand up in court. But that's not to say that we're fine and everything's, we're not worried about anything. There still needs to be that robust safeguarding response, even if it's not met that criteria or especially if it's not met that criteria for the legal threshold there. So sorry to jump in, Sally, but I just wanted to kind of clarify that.
Yeah, that's really helpful. And I think the other thing is you mentioned no further action, and what the report presses for is for it to be documented that there's no further action for now at this point in time. It doesn't mean that there'll be no further action ever. And then I think, so on the back of that, where there's no proven child sexual abuse, practitioners may be a little nervous about documenting that there is. Again, you mentioned earlier about going to court and being hauled over the coals for things that you've documented. But where there are records and the information isn't documented at all, so talking to a child, if you don't document the sorts of things that they've told you, you might want to use their words, you might have picked up certain behaviours. There may be some health signs, for example, recurrent urinary tract infections. Unless you write all of that down explicitly in the records, it means in time to come, as practitioners move on and a new practitioner picks up a case, the child gets re-referred, there is no history, there's just a silence about all of this previous concern about sexual abuse. It's not there for people to rely on and build on and consider in future child protection investigations. So it's really important that that is documented. Yeah, so I think that's probably covered those two aspects about the difference in the threshold and the importance that even if you haven't met the criminal threshold for a conviction, that it's really carefully documented what actually has happened. You're not making a judgment, are you? You're just stating fact.
Yeah, and again, it's interesting how there's often reluctance, even to talk about the most basic things. Again, we often hear people talk about, well, she said that she'd been touched. So what does that mean? Let's be specific here. Let's be clear. Let's use language. And like you say, there's a risk that we rely on somebody just holding that information in their head. But if they leave or move position, somebody else picks it up. What does that actually mean here? So yeah, like I say, being very clear, naming it. We encourage children to name it. Again, we've got the NSPCC coming into us towards the end of the week, talking about their resources, things like the wonderful PANTH resources and things like that. Actually, it's about naming it. It's about saying this is a penis, this is a vagina, but as adults, we kind of go, it's kind of down there. Whereas we've got to model it, haven't we? We've got to model what we're saying to children. And often we don't. We kind of shy away from that a little bit.
And that probably builds on practitioners and my first point about practitioners not having the skills to discuss things with children, those communication skills. If you haven't had that exploration, that verbal exploration with a child because you haven't got the skills, you then haven't got anything to document, have you?
And you see that then knock-on effect then if we're looking at police action, legal action, everything else. So brilliant. Thank you, Sally. So Sam, for the last time on our poll, can I bring you back in again? Picking up on our last question again, thank you so much everybody for responding to the poll. It really brings it alive today. But the question that we posed to everybody here is, how can we improve understanding between legal thresholds, as we've just been talking about, and safeguarding responses in relation to child sexual abuse, particularly where there is that lack of evidence for criminal conviction? So Sam, what have we had come into us?
So again, I think massively picking up on what you guys are saying in regards to that fear around the language and capturing it. Lots of people have been saying they'd like more training, they'd like more webinars and more elements like the ThePPod itself to help professionals understand those expectations and feel more comfortable within carrying out that role. Transparency, and I think that might be between agencies as well as with agencies and families there. So we've got someone being really honest and saying, do you know what, this is a really hard one. I'm not sure how to answer that. And I think that's really important at the same time. The use of resolving professional differences and procedures and policies really coming through with guidelines attached to that one. Safeguarding supervision and safeguarding teams. So again, picking up on what Sally was saying earlier. Also, we've got hold closing professional meetings to clarify the status, rationale for closing, and ensuring that all partners are clear on the reasoning of why. A criminal threshold is much higher than finding out of fact hearings, and the ending of the police investigation does not mean that the abuse didn't happen or that we don't believe them. It is essential to ensure that ongoing support is offered to both victim and family.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Sam. And again, thank you so much for everybody who's been taking part in that poll as we've gone throughout today. It is absolutely crucial we get your voice into this as well, and some fantastic feedback and some real honesty as well, because it is a difficult area. It is tricky, and we've been acknowledging. And just in terms of training, we are at the moment, we are exploring lots of ideas for training. I had some very, very positive meetings recently, both locally and with our partnerships across the Avon Somerset area. So we are very much looking to develop something in these areas, but also we want to make sure we get it right. I think there's a risk with these things. Sometimes we do a tick box and we go, we'll just commission this bit of training and that's going to solve everything. It's not. So we're really keen to look at all the different aspects of this in detail and make sure we can get a really good response to that. So yeah, watch this space. We are working on that one, I promise you. And Sally, just to round us off then, I know you've mentioned a few times as we've gone through this recommendations, which are really key. And I know, like you mentioned, the national panel have made a number of recommendations, both nationally and more on a local level. So would you be able to just kind of pick up on some of those?
Yeah, thanks, Steve. And people on the call can read the recommendations in the report. I've mentioned a few already, but I'll just summarise a few of the national ones and then end with some for the Safeguarding Partnership. And then that hopefully will segue nicely into Margaret and Kerry's session. So perhaps some of the national ones that I haven't mentioned, there's a call on government to do a strategic plan, pulling in together all the data about intrafamilial child sexual abuse, the guidance and research that's available, so that we've got a consistent pathway for responding to child sexual abuse. Again, there's recommendations around people with a sexual offending history, around having a robust assessment of those people, for there to be more explicit guidance in working together, and for probation and children's services to work more closely together. And overriding recommendation that all practitioners know that they should be talking to children, not just that they can talk to children about this, but that they should, and that there's guidance and training available for them to do that. And then there are three, in terms of family courts, the President of the Family Division and the Family Justice Board, CAFCAS, and also Ofsted. There's recommendations for all of those organisations to read the report and think about what it means for them and the legislation that they're responsible for. So to finish off then on for safeguarding partnerships, we have encouraged all safeguarding partnerships to consider the findings of the review in full and develop their own bespoke action plan. You know your own data, you know where your gaps are, you know the things that you're good at. So to have an action plan developed on the back of this, and really important to have that multi-agency training needs assessment to make sure that all practitioners across all agencies, and particularly for early years and schools, so that they are all equipped to be able to do their role and to talk to children and to support them and escalate any concerns appropriately. And then finally, to think about that difference between that criminal threshold and the child protection threshold that we were talking about, and to audit to make sure that that's really clearly understood within the partnership. And I think there's been some brilliant comments, by the way, that have come up through the poll and what Sam's been feeding back. And that does reflect one of the national recommendations as well, which is where it comes to light that somebody who poses a risk to children is in contact with children, or if you're going to close a case, it is really important that that discussion is multi-agency, and everybody who's holding a piece of that jigsaw contributes to that discussion and is content with the outcome of that discussion. So
Fantastic.
I'm looking
Sally,
forward now to hearing what you're doing.
absolutely. Well, like you say, it segues beautifully into my other two guests that I've got coming along today. Before I do, thank you, Sally. I say we're not letting you go just yet, but thank you so much for all of that input. I really, really appreciate it, and that deep dive into those key areas. And like you mentioned, as part of it, there's recommendations for national government as well as for local safeguarding children partnerships, which allows me to introduce to you Margaret Brookes, who's the SSCP Business Manager and Chair of the Strengthening Responses to Child Sexual Abuse Working Group, along with Kerry Male, who's the Dept Designated Nurse for Safeguarding Children, who will be taking over as the lead role for child sexual abuse and leading on the Responding to Child Sexual Abuse policy, which includes pathways locally. So, Margaret, Kerry, thank you so much as well for joining us today and being willing to come along and put yourselves forward as part of the recording today. So, how are you doing? You okay?
Yeah, good. Thanks, Steve. Really interesting to hear some of that feedback, Sally, and setting the scene to the national landscape. Yeah, so look forward to kind of giving people a sense of what we've been doing locally.
Absolutely. So I know on that one, Margaret, I say I know you've been leading some work around this. So if we can just start off with yourself, could you just provide a bit of background to us on the work of the group that you've been chairing?
Sure. Well, we have some existing working groups, so called our Learning Improvement, Quality and Performance groups. And back at the very beginning of the year, they sponsored the development of our, what you described, the Strengthening Responses to Child Sexual Abuse working group that was established in April. First of all, we were just looking at the outcomes of the report that Sally spoke to, and then we've also mapped that and really thought about what that means in terms of other reports, rapid reviews and learning reviews we've had in recent years within Somerset to make sure that we're not, having duplication, but that we're having a level of action that will really respond to the local need in our area. I think on the way from the April meeting to where we're at now, the scale of the work has really become clear. And when we're talking about system change, an important step along the way has been bringing in other people. So seeking, nominations from fostering services, wider representatives from the education field, and also from Bernardo. So making sure we've got that voice of expertise from different segments within the local setting, really, and local safeguarding work we do.
Absolutely. Thank you, Margaret. And you mentioned, like you say, not just the National Panel's report, but also more locally some of the reviews we've had, rapid reviews we've had. And Kerry, if I can bring you in on this, because I know in particular there was a rapid review that you were involved in that Margaret mentioned just now, which you were very heavily involved in some of the learning from that. So would you be able to provide us with a bit of an overview of the learning from that review and how this fed then into the working group that you're part of?
Yeah, and actually quite a lot of the themes that came out of that have already been touched upon through some of the themes that came out of the I Want Them All to Notice report as well that Sally's already talked to. So we had 4 key areas of learning that was identified, and they were how our multi-agency safeguarding hub, our MASH discussions assess risk, the assessments and information sharing, understanding medical presentations in the context of other indicators of child sexual abuse, and also incorporating the voices of children. And we have done a lot of work in all of those areas. With regards to MASH discussions, we undertook an audit in this year, which helps identify strengths and areas that we need to continue to develop. And we also have information represented from GPs in that area as well now, so we can get a much more holistic understanding of what's going on for children and families. With assessments and information sharing, information sharing is something that comes up obviously nationally. It comes up in a lot of our reviews, but across the partnership, it's something that we continue to do a lot of work on. We have a web page which supports understanding of information sharing, helps professionals to understand when they should and shouldn't in the context of safeguarding. And we also have our information sharing platforms to support professionals, Transform and Cider, which within Somerset, which really supports professionals in understanding who's involved, which supports that information sharing. Understanding medical presentations in the context of other indicators of child sexual abuse. Sally did touch upon that. It's quite difficult because in isolation, some of those presentations might be perceived as normal childhood illness. So it's very much about having all the information needed and making that holistic assessment. And that's and within that, we've done training as well as developing a policy on responding to child sexual abuse to help professionals in how to respond, have clear pathways, but also where to go for that advice and support, because it is very complex. And also with voices of children, already mentioned how important that is. And it's also, not relying on just on disclosures, but it's about having the behaviours and trying to get that children's lived experience. So we continue to do a lot of work in that and try and weave it throughout all our work in the partnership. And we're just completing a bite-sized briefing to support professionals as well, which should be available in the next month.
Great, lovely. Thank you, Kerry. And like I say, it is tricky because sometimes these signs and indicators could be completely normal medical needs,
Yes.
but it's navigating, isn't it? Actually, what is that, or what are the pieces of the jigsaw that add up that potentially could be something else? And again, I think that then impacts on confidence, doesn't it, from practitioners to be able to say, actually, I'm quite concerned about this. Yeah, naming it again when it could be other things. Yeah, but
Yeah.
that is kind of slightly in the world of safeguarding we're in, isn't it? There are these things that for any forms of abuse that could be other things, but actually, what's the kind of the evidence that's sort of building up that bigger picture? So, thank you. So, Margaret, if I can just come back to yourself then. So, obviously, we talked about the group form and we had the rapid review. So, and you mentioned it's kind of evolved over time. So, how did the current group kind of evolve, and what is it that you've been leading on?
Yeah, sure. So we've had a number of meetings since April, and I think one of the key focuses of that time from April to now has been to agree what our priorities are and thinking about the scale of work that's involved here. What are some of our more immediate, quicker wins we can have in this area, and what's some of the work that needs long-term investment from all of our partners? And I think, when Sally was talking through about the shift in asking people to refer to no further police action at this time as a way of talking about where we're up to with responses to concerns of child sexual abuse. That's perhaps a shorter term goal where, as a partnership, we can make headway with and create, clear communication within the police and within other agencies around. But some of the longer term areas of work, the training needs assessment, understanding the outcome of that, and then developing an appropriate training plan that suits the needs of all professionals. That's one of our longer term goals. So thinking about the short term, longer term work. And I think for anyone interested, obviously it's quite a lengthy report, but I would suggest page 120 really helps to bring to life the range of different areas that we need to think about when we're talking about system change in this area, to help us think about prevention, responding, and also helping recovery, because that's a really important area for us to think about as well. How do we support people to recover who've had these experiences? And I think it links to some of what you mentioned earlier, Steve, about our work in the partnership around developing trauma-informed responses. So that's also been a key area of the work, thinking about the joining up of other work streams we have and how we can see overlapping benefits for children at risk of child sexual abuse or those who have experienced that.
And thank you, Margaret. And it'll be interesting to see, I think, in terms of the recommendations from things like the independent inquiry into child sexual abuse as well. I know they made 20 recommendations. Some of those, I think the last 4 recommendations were about, let's say, support for victims in kind of changing that climate that we have of, well, until it's gone to court, we can't really put in any support for victims, but actually we've got to look at that very differently. So it'll be really interesting to see. I know there are a number of legislative changes on the horizon, so it'll be interesting to sort of see how that comes through as part of those recommendations and how we can then feed that into the more local work. But,
Yeah, exactly. And I think also, Steve, for us thinking about what we have locally available already. So when you think about training and tools, really reflecting on what do we already have and what do staff tell us about how useful they find those tools and where the gaps are. So the survey that's been promoted this week, we've already got over 150 responses to that and some really clear pieces of feedback around people wanting practical, usable, accessible guides that help them to know how to respond to really complex circumstances. The developing of those guides is a bit that takes a bit longer work. So that's maybe moving into the longer term part of the plan.
Yeah, perfect. And like we say, we'll put out the link for that survey as well. But it's so important we do get everybody's feedback into it. It's great we've had so many already, but it'll be great if we can get many, many more, because we need to get that holistic view from right the way across all partnership agencies, including our friends within the voluntary sector as well. So please do respond to that survey that's out at the moment. So it's running towards the end of this month, so you've got a bit of time to respond to it. But I'm just kind of picking up on that. So we're now 6 months in, so it started in April. So we're a little bit longer than 6 months into that working group now. So what's been the kind of focused on over that time? And I guess what are the next steps? Where are we going next with this?
Sure. One thing I'll just come in first of all, and then Kerry will talk about a couple of other areas of work. But I would say one thing really excitingly is we were able to get that group's backing to support the decision for this forum week to focus on child sexual abuse and to have different speakers, as you've already mentioned to Steve, to come and speak to the partnership about this work in this area. So that's one of the key areas, the work that went into planning this and pulling this together. And I guess our hope is that will result in some resources that different teams in different settings can use to reflect on and to support reflective discussions moving forwards. Because when I look at, some of the survey responses to date, having reflective spaces to talk about this issue and think about responses to child sexual abuse is one of the areas that staff ask for. So, giving them tools from experts in the area will really, I think, be helpful and have a lasting legacy from the work that's gone into this area. I think another really important arm is the training needs assessment we mentioned. And I think that really needs to help us ensure that the unique needs of each professional group are taken into account. Those that are working in preventative spaces and being able to refer on to those who are working with children where we know there's been an issue of child sexual abuse in the family, to those working in the most complex of circumstances. We need to have that graduated training offer that professionals feel really help them to be as confident, as skilled as possible in working in this field and building on what we already have available locally.
Perfect. Thank you. Kerry, anything from yourself on that one?
Yeah, so you've already mentioned the practitioner survey, which we're currently undertaking, and alongside that, we've just been undertaking an audit as well, looking into strategy discussions where sexual abuse has been a feature, and both of these will really support us in the partnership to understand where our strengths are and further areas we need to develop. And also, as we've already mentioned, we have developed a web page with a lot of resources, as well as the policy and including pathways on how to respond to child sexual abuse, which is so important because, as everybody's already mentioned, just really supporting professionals is so complex and nuanced, just trying to guide them through what they can do. And in those scenarios that might not fit in the pathways that we do have, where to go for that advice. We do have children's social care, which have a professional line for our safeguarding leads, as well as our sexual assault referral centre, the Bridge, who has a 24/7 advice line. So, it really gives that clear signposting of where to go if it doesn't give you the exact guidance.
No, definitely. Thank you. And so I guess just kind of rounding us off a little bit now then, I guess we've sort of talked about the work that you've been doing so far, and like you've been mentioned, there's a lot of work still to do in this area. But from the work that's been undertaken so far, what would you say would be those kind of key messages from the working group to all of our colleagues across the partnership agencies?
Thanks. I think if I start, Steve, I'd say that the risk report and other evidence makes it really clear that child sexual abuse thrives in secrecy and silence. And I think our real hope is that by having professionals who are skilled and confident to talk about children's experience, we can start to break down some of those barriers and bring into the fore some of the experiences children have had and help us develop responses that are helpful to them. I think it's also really important that we think about the scale of system change, and that takes time. And Sally mentioned myth busting. Myths evolve over time, so there's probably some unlearning that we need to invest in. And I think being professionally generous along the way with that. And also thinking about, that each professional has a unique contribution to play in strengthening our responses to this area. And it's only really by working together that we'll see those changes we're looking for in the longer term. So I think that for me would be some of the key messages, that working together, the kind of commitment and reflection on maybe doing things differently and understanding the scale of the problems for some children living with this harm in their families.
Yeah, absolutely. Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Margaret. Thank you so much, Kerry. And of course, thank you so much, Sally, for today's recording, because I know it's been something a bit different. We're doing it live, which is all new and exciting and slightly scary. So I really appreciate you coming along today. So just to round things off, we have been running a Q&A throughout this, and promised everybody joining us live here today, there would be an opportunity to post any questions you've got. So what we're going to do, we are going to allow people to unmute yourselves now. So if you have got any questions, please do. If you can pop your hand up for us, and we'll be able to come to you with any questions you've got. Whilst people are thinking about that, we have got a couple of things that have come in, which I can read out. The first one was there was a comment about practitioners not being professionally curious enough and closing the case as a result. I feel that systems and thresholds are what cause the majority of closures in my experience. Practitioners can be curious enough to ask the questions and hypothesize, but once a child has withdrawn their disclosure/allegation, they are less likely to share anything further. practitioners then stuck fighting against a system of thresholds and where the risk is now. What is the threshold? And I find this very difficult within the system. So it's a bit of an open question about sort of what are your thoughts on this? I'll invite this from any of my guests. So really sort of that difficulty between sort of thresholds, particularly I guess where you don't have a clear disclosure from somebody. Any of our guests got any thoughts on that?
I've been thinking about that question, Steve. I saw it in the chat. Yeah, and it's a really interesting point. I think clearly we have to have thresholds, don't we? Otherwise, we'd all be absolutely overwhelmed, and they are valuable for that reason. So I think it's important, as Margaret has just said, to really have that multi-agency decision making when you close a case. And sometimes what we see in reviews at panel is you don't have everybody around the table. Some people don't, the email goes to the wrong address. There's all sorts of reasons why people don't attend that multi-agency meeting, but that might be somebody who's got a really key and valuable piece of information. So it's about not closing cases till you're absolutely sure that all agencies have had their say. And I think the other thing about having all agencies around the table is that then means that school teacher or that GP or that specialist nurse goes away with that information and has quite a low threshold for referring back in again if concerns come back up. And then, as Kerry mentioned, that's about making sure that you've got your MASH processes in place so that those referrals can be appropriately reviewed. Really important to have explicit information within that referral, and just I suppose having that low threshold to pick them back up again. And I did wonder through both Margaret and Kerry's discussions around the difference that multi-agency child protection teams will also make, because you've got the right people there that you can just check information against.
Absolutely. And like I say, essentially sort of working together as one team to safeguard children and sort of overcoming some of those barriers of passing information across or lack of information sharing. Essentially, we're all working together here. So I think, yeah, it'll be interesting to see if anybody's not familiar with that. We're talking about the developments of the Family First Partnership Programme, which are in train at the moment, which will have sweeping changes across the country in terms of how we work with families in a multi-agency collaborative sense. So if you're not familiar with that, do have a quick Google Families First Partnership Programme and check that out. And we are planning at the moment some future podcasts with our partner agencies around the Families First Partnership Programme. So keep your eyes peeled for that if you want to find out more about that. Kerry, Margaret, anything from yourselves on that one at all?
Yeah, Kerry, I don't know if you want to add anything, or I'll chip in with some thoughts.
I was going to say probably just one of the other things to add to Sally is about the contingency planning as part of that closure as well is really important. So it's, making sure that the professionals that are left around that child and family are really clear on how to support them going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we can have the best plans in place, best plans in the world, but unless they're dynamic, unless they change to meet the needs, and we have backup plans of if they don't work, then actually, we're sort of setting things up to fail if we haven't done that pre-thinking about actually what backup plans, what contingency plans can we put in place? When do we do something different if things don't change, and what are we going to do differently at that point as well? Absolutely. So, Margaret, did you want to come on that one?
Yeah, so I think what I was left thinking about as you were describing the comment that's put in, Steve, is the need for us to build holistic assessments, and maybe within training and support we give to staff to understand that sometimes making allegations and withdrawing those allegations can be part of the course for some children. And that doesn't mean that necessarily nothing has happened to them. But I think that supporting professionals to have those conversations together, reflect on, as what you were saying, Kerry, what might be the contingency plan, what's the basis for the decision about the action we can take at this point in time, but recognising that as a point in time decision, not a fixed forever decision. I think that's something really important to reflect on, and making sure that all professionals have an outcome of that decision so that they can reflect back on, and if they want to challenge that, being confident and able to. I think those are some of the kind of important things to consider with scenarios like the one that was described.
Yeah, absolutely. Fantastic. Thank you. Okay, one other question actually that's come in to me separately is for yourself, Margaret and Kerry. There was a question that came in terms of the work that you've been doing at the moment. We're saying hoping to sort of publish some work early next year. Simple question is where can people access that once it is published?
That one has a simple answer. That will be on the SSCP website. And that we also do hope that representatives from across the agencies will promote that within their own agencies to also look at how that fits with their local protocols, guidance, etc. Taking, for example, one school's safeguarding policy might look quite different to another's. So how that's promoted locally across the range of agencies in the partnership will need some reflection.
Fantastic. Brilliant. Thank you so much. Well, I can't see anything else in the chat, but it's not loading for me. So Sam, I'll just very quickly check in with yourself whether there is anything else that's coming in on the Q&A that I'm not able to access before we start to draw things to a close. No,
that's everything you've got.
Fantastic. Well, brilliant. Well, thank you so much, everybody that's come in today. It's been absolutely fascinating. It's been an experience. And so Sally Shearer from the National Child Safeguarding Practice Review Panel, Margaret Brookes from the Somerset Safeguarding Children Partnership Business Unit, and from Kerry Male from the ICB here in Somerset. Thank you so much, guys, for coming in and being part of today's recording. And importantly as well, thank you to the 100 or so people that we've had joining us as part of this podcast recording as well, because it's been great having your input as we've gone throughout this and the responses to the poll. And as we mentioned, we have got the survey running throughout this month. So please, if you've not responded to that already, please respond to that. It only takes 5 minutes to do, doesn't take long at all, and it's so valuable that we get your views in there. So just to round off, just a quick reminder that if you have found yourself affected by anything that we've gone through today, please check out the support available to you on the SSCP website. On the forum page, you'll find a whole load of specific helplines and contact websites for you at the bottom of that page. Now, just a quick reminder, we've got loads of things taking place throughout this week as part of the SSCP's December 2025 Forum Week. Just picking up on this, the rest of the week, on Wednesday, we're looking very much around supporting victims of child sexual abuse, where we have the Greenhouse coming in, talking about the support they provide. We have Dr. Anna Riddell as well from the Bridge Sexual Assault Referral Clinic Centre, talking about the support they provide for victims. And as well, we have Jodie from the Bernardo's Project, the Phoenix Project here in Somerset, talking about the support they put in place for victims as well. If we move forward onto Thursday, we focus around protecting children against child sexual abuse. We have the wonderful Lucy Faithful Foundation coming into us, and we have our colleagues from probation as well, picking up on a lot of the things we've been talking about just now. And on Friday, we're leading through looking at some of the initiatives and resources available, where we have SASP looking at safeguarding in sport, and the NSPCC. And of course, if you're able to join us tomorrow, even better, we have the Centre of Expertise on Child Sexual Abuse coming into us as well. So please don't miss that if you can. But don't panic if you're not able to join us live for those ones, because we do record all of the webinars and they will be available to you afterwards on the website that we mentioned on the webpage and on the SSCP's YouTube channel. If you can join us live, though, it's a great opportunity to have more interaction and ask some of our guests the questions as we have been today. So, Sally, Margaret, Kerry, thank you so much as well for coming in and being willing to take the plunge and do our live ThePPod recording. It's been absolutely fantastic having your expertise coming in today. And as I mentioned, thank you so much to everybody else that's joined us as part of this. We hope it's been useful for you, and it's been great to have your input. So thank you very much, everybody. Take care of yourselves, and hopefully we'll see you again tomorrow for our second part of the Forum Week. So thank you very much. Take care. Bye-bye.
Let's work together to help keep children safe.